The Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Tonight, we'll see web video that kids make to gloat about being bullies. And we'll talk about the media and the Queens police shootings. But first, our top 5 video picks for this week. 2 from New York and 3 on the Middle East. This is the only known video of the police shooting in Queens. It comes near the end of the incident. Trent Benefield had taken 3 bullets and was down as police handcuffed him. They may have had to do that under police procedure if they thought he was a suspect at the time, but since we now know Benefield was unarmed, this video looks like a literal case of adding insult to injury.
You were screaming in pain and handcuffed. What was going through your mind?
I thought I was dead. I thought I was going to die.
Video and then interviewed briefly on New York One. Then there is the interview that Sean Bell's fiancée, Nicole Polt, gave to Larry King Live. With this afternoon's rally criticizing police policy in general, her comments stand in contrast.
Well, my view of the police, no, I don't believe it's changed my view of the police. I believe it was the individual who made this happen. I mean, I believe there is some things that need to be looked into with the situation, with the way everything happened, but I just think it's that person.
Of course, it could be the individuals and police policy. Next topic, Iraq. It took incoming Defense Secretary Robert Gates just 2 words to change the whole national conversation about the war. Save this one for the time capsule.
Mr. Gates, do you believe that we are currently winning in Iraq?
No, sir.
And why are we not winning? Maybe one reason the U.S. isn't loved in Baghdad is because American troops have fun recording themselves taunting Iraqi kids with bottled water.
Mike? Come on, keep running. Here. Here. You getting them?
I'm getting them, son.
Come on, you're almost there. Hurry.
That's fucked up.
Here. Can you see him?
I can see him, son.
Like 2 miles.
This kid's running forever.
Come on! Come on! What?
He's chasing it, man.
Hey, you still didn't get it.
Then there is this video released by Israel trying to show that Hezbollah fires rockets at Israel from civilian neighborhoods in Lebanon, using Lebanese civilians as human shields. This tape seems to show Hezbollah rockets being fired from among Lebanese apartment buildings. Israel's point is that Israel attacks residential neighborhoods only because Hezbollah sometimes fires its rockets at Israel from these areas. You'll see one of those Israeli attacks on a suspect building in a few seconds, and then an apparent rocket launcher returning to its Hezbollah hiding place. And that's our video picks for this week. Later, we'll conclude our series screening some of the best TV reporting on race and ethnicity. But first, we'll talk about the coverage of stories like the police shooting of Sean Bell and his two friends. How should the media talk about race in this kind of story? What underlying issues do we need to report on to understand this particular incident? What kind of language is fair to the victims and to the police? With me first tonight are Keith Woods from the Poynter Institute for Excellence in Journalism and Leonard Levitt, who writes the blog nypdconfidential.com. Welcome, both of you, to the program. Thanks very much for coming in. Leonard, it's a story we've seen many times and many times in New York. Police shoot black civilians in a murky situation, outraging the community. How do you begin, as a reporter, to approach this kind of situation fairly?
I wish I could give you an easy answer for that. I really don't know. I think you've just got to take it one step at a time, and you've got to be skeptical of what the police say, and you've also got to be in a position where you're not being taken advantage of by certain elements in the community who've got their own agendas.
How long have you been on the police beat?
Oh, on and off, probably about 20 years.
Can a reporter build credibility with both the affected communities and the police?
Yes, I think so. I think what everybody wants is fairness. I think what everybody expects is a reporter that, or everybody hopes for is a reporter with no agendas himself. And yes, I do think that this can be reported fairly.
Keith Woods, the Poynter Institute for Excellence in Journalism, studies many situations that journalists face and sometimes issues guidelines. Is this one of those situations that you've looked at and seen patterns in?
Well, there are two patterns. There's the pattern of the event itself, that police in some sort of crisis situation shoot someone who turns out often to be unarmed, the wrong person, the wrong house. We just saw one of those situations in Chicago. And the rest of that pattern is the community reaction that we've seen. The media, for the most part, has the responsibility of serving both of those audiences fairly, completely, and maybe with a sense of history, which is probably one of the most important things in any of these stories, because these community reactions don't blossom out of zero. They come from someplace else. That is connected to that pattern that we just talked about.
What do you mean by that? For example?
Well, if you've got a situation in which a community explodes because a police officer shoots a man, and among the parts of the conversation are that there is a racial element to this, or even a racist element to this, then you have to recognize that that comes from a history of truth. That may or may not be relevant to this case, but it is, in fact, years of abuses, mistakes, many of them happening in the black community.
Does that ring true to you as a reporter?
Absolutely. And the key case here is the precedent is the Diallo case. And the difference in New York and the coverage is that I think there's a much more restrained tone in the media, and so far at least a more restrained attitude by the victims and their supporters.
As we saw in that clip of the fiancée of Sean Bell.
Right. That's one thing, and the Reverend Sharpton has been more restrained up till now. I don't know what's going to happen in the next few weeks than he was with Diallo, and the reason for that in New York is that we had a very tough, not in a good sense, in my opinion, tough mayor with Rudy Giuliani and Police Commissioner Howard Safer, who was really insensitive. Remember, he was out in Hollywood at the Oscars the night before he was supposed to testify at a city council hearing on the Diallo case. Different situation now, up to a point. I mean, you've heard the mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, talking about his unacceptable, inexplicable. Giuliani never would have said that. And Ray Kelly has got a lot of political capital in the black community. I think it may be disappearing pretty quickly, but up till now, at least, he has had that.
We want to open up our phones on this. Viewers How, in your opinion, has the media been doing on this story? Are they being fair to all sides? Call us. Give us examples of good reporting or bad reporting that you've seen or heard or read anywhere in the media. Have stories made you angry? Do you feel well informed? Do you feel the media are perhaps jumping to conclusions or perhaps being too cautious from jumping to conclusions? Call us with your opinions about the media in general or specifically. 212-251-0801. You see the number on your screen, 212-251-0801. Keith Woods, one issue that always comes up is what kinds of contexts to place these incidents in. Police Commissioner Kelly told me in an interview this week that New York City cops have 50 million contacts with civilians a year. Therefore, tragedies like this are extremely rare. But many New Yorkers can recount a list of names of people who've been victimized in these kinds of shootings where either they turned out to be innocent or where there was, widespread perception of excessive force, and can list the names, and that's the context. So how do we approach context as journalists?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's only one of me. And so if they make a mistake with me, I'm gone, and the context is irrelevant. It's why this has so much heat. You can't look at it in relation to any other number and suggest that mitigates the problem that someone dying innocently represents. But I think beyond that, I mean, there's all sorts of context. There's the context that this sort of police force is brought to bear in many cases in communities of color, in many cases in black communities, brown communities across the country, and that the context of that, of course, is a history that precedes even that of predominantly white police forces, including the New York Police Department, historically, bringing that sort of force to bear on predominantly black and Latino and non-white communities. But the rest of that context, of course, is that in each of these cases, the individual elements, the individual details of the case, when looked at individually, don't necessarily relate so closely to one another. So you've got to provide, as the media, as much information about why this group in the community is reacting as it is and this group is not, why the police department as a whole might want to look at these shootings each time they happen.
Let's take a phone call right now from one of our viewers who has an observation about caution versus jumping to conclusions, I think. This is Celeste in Manhattan. Hi, Celeste, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Well, my comment is that what I don't understand is that I think the media now is being a little more cautious. There are certain news channels that do certain coverage, and they don't prevail all the adequate information that should be necessarily given to the community. They automatically look for an individual that see how many felonies he has and how many crimes he has committed. I think a lot of these police officers are insensitive to people of color. They don't live in our world, the bottom line. They need to have police officers that are brought up in the inner cities and understand people of color's ways. Thank you. That's my comment.
Okay, Celeste, thank you very much. Leonard, when you're reporting on an incident, what role do you think, what relevance do you think somebody's previous police record, for example, has in an incident like this?
I don't think it has any relevance at all in this instance. Police are putting out the fact that they all have felony convictions, all three guys. I don't see the relevance whatsoever if they were unarmed. Significantly,
police couldn't have known that at the time.
Absolutely.
They didn't know what their records were.
Absolutely.
They didn't know that Sean Bell was getting married the next morning, for that matter. Maybe there's too much reporting about that, because they didn't know that he was a bridegroom either.
You know, in the Diallo case, the police, they did everything in their power to try and turn up something negative on Amadou Diallo. They tossed his apartment. They bullied his roommates, his friends. This fourth man is, you know, they're going absolutely wild looking for this fourth man and using the same tactics. They're like a wounded animal, and they're striking out at anybody they can get their hands on, really, who they feel has any tangential involvement with the so-called fourth man. And, you know, clearly, in my opinion, they're doing more harm than they are good. They're stirring up the situation. They're getting people furious, and rightly so, in my opinion.
You know, I don't think it's a simple question of is it relevant or is it not relevant that someone has a criminal record. If your suspicion journalistically is that the reason that information is being provided is to somehow help to mitigate the impact of the shooting, that you can use that information to decide how to use information that you get. But telling me something about the people involved in the context that it belongs, the lead of the story, the top of the story, the middle, the bottom, in a cut line someplace, is still sharing information with me. And I think that too much of the discussion generally around these kinds of cases tends to be that black and white, it's either in or it's out, of talking.
So it's put out there, and then it's a question of how you use it.
Yeah.
Because if the police say it to you, and you're a reporter, and they're giving you this background on this victim, then it would almost be irresponsible to ignore it completely.
Well, you should be going after it yourself, whether
Yes.
the police are providing it or not. And
Right.
that's that we get tripped up on that. Well,
Yes.
the police are putting out the propaganda. Sure, they may be. But you should also be asking the same questions.
Right. But by the flip side, we want to look at the record of the police officer.
Right.
Right. So it's come out, for example, that at least according to the police, the cop who happens to be white, who fired 31 of the 50 shots, is a 12-year veteran who never fired a weapon before. Now, again, maybe this is propaganda to make it look like, well, he's not somebody who's prone to excessive force, but at the same time, there it is. It's a fact about his record. If he had fired his weapon 5 times in the last 5 months, well, we would report that. So if he hasn't fired his weapon at all in his 12-year career, then maybe we should report that.
Well, again, against what context? He's not fired his weapon once in 12 years. What's the average for the cop on the street? How many times do they fire their weapons? And again, if you begin a story that says the New York police officer who fired the 31 shots had never fired a shot before then, and that's the lead of the story, maybe you've done the bidding of somebody.
Yeah.
But if you tell me that information, I need, as a member of the public, as much as you can tell me
Right.
to help me to figure out how to act.
So it's a matter, in that case, of the context of the context.
Right.
Right? If the context is how much he's used his weapon before, well, then what's the police average? What does that actually say about somebody? You have anything on that?
What I would say is that, I think I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, you cannot believe anything that the police department tells you without, you've got to check everything out. They're notorious liars. That's not just the NYPD, that's law enforcement in general. This police department, let me begin by saying that the mayor ran on a platform in 2001 promising more transparency in the police department than existed under Mayor Giuliani. There is no transparency in the police department. They control every bit of information. They're very selective on what they put out, and they're retaliatory towards reporters who they consider are writing negatively about the police department.
Retaliatory how, for example?
In terms of access. I know in my case they put my mugshot up on the security desk as a security threat. I wasn't allowed in the building. Police Commissioner Kelly went out to Newsday himself in Long Island to complain about me.
Your employer?
My employer at the time. That's retaliatory.
Well, when you say that the police lie all the time, more than other branches of government?
Well, I can't tell you about all branches of government, but I can tell you about law enforcement and the police department. They are notorious liars. The NYPD is no exception. We've seen this with the FBI and in some of these indictments with the terrorists, so-called terrorists. I think a reporter has got to be skeptical about every bit of information that comes out from law enforcement authorities.
And you think reporters during the Bloomberg-Kelly administration are too gullible?
I don't think they're too gullible. I think they're cowed. I think that they are very reluctant to criticize the police department.
Why?
Because well, there are two reasons. The first is the retaliation, and the second is New York is a different place now, journalistically, since 9/11. I think there is a sense of fear, a sense that Commissioner Kelly and the police department are protecting the city against terrorism, and I think there is a basic reluctance to rock the boat.
Let's take another phone call. This is Joe in Fort Washington. Where are you? Fort Washington Avenue? Is that where you are?
That's right.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, regarding the media, I think they tried in this situation to be balanced, but the only thing that I noticed, I think, is over the too much coverage of the story.
Sorry, your cell phone is breaking up, Joe. Give us that again.
Oh, I said I believe it's too much coverage.
Too much coverage. Okay.
There's just too much coverage, and just to get back to what you guys are discussing in terms of the information police gives you and what has come up in terms of the Attorney General wanting people wanting independent investigation. I feel the same way because when I listened to the trial of Amadou Diallo, I felt that the prosecutor wasn't, I mean, the guy that was prosecuting wasn't really prosecuting. I felt he was kind of working for the cops during that trial. But anyway.
You thought the prosecutor had sold out to the other side. Okay, Joe, thank you very much. Well, what about this issue, Keith, of too much coverage? Here is a very hot-button situation. Obviously, it's a very emotional situation. From a media marketing standpoint, it's a very marketable story. But it is one incident. It is one death, horrible as it is. Is there too much focus on a story like this once it starts, out of proportion, and perhaps leading to the ignoring of other things that are just as important?
Well, I in my hotel room today, watched a lot of television. There was too much reporting on Britney Spears and the offer to have her tummy tuck. There was too much reporting on Jennifer Aniston's breakup. There's a lot of bad and overdone reporting. Issues like this need to be reported, but it's not the simple regurgitation every day of the he said, she said kind of stories. It's everything that resides under this, everything from the transparency issues that Leonard was talking about, which will be an issue when this story goes away, to the schism that has always existed, pre-existed 9/11, has sustained itself since 9/11 in communities like this. The tension between the police department and these communities didn't go away in some communities in America just because of 9/11 and not in New York any more than anywhere else. Those issues are ongoing, and as we continue to do the reporting, the challenge isn't whether or not you pull back, but whether you in fact dig down deeper into the underlying issues that preceded it and will remain beyond it.
But with all the things that are going on, Leonard, and I realize your beat is just the police beat, so you're going to look at this almost solely. But even of all the things that are going on with the NYPD and all the crime issues in the city, all the police behavior issues in the city, is there too much focus sometimes on a story like this because it's so easy to report it as us versus them?
I don't think so. I mean, what could be worse than an unarmed civilian being killed by the police for the wrong reasons? I mean, it doesn't get worse than that. And this is not to say that the police intentionally set out to kill anybody. This is a tragic, terrible mistake, but it's not the first time that it's happened. And nobody has come to grips with, is there a systemic problem? For example, Commissioner Kelly said after this, we've got to, we're going to have an investigation to check on our undercover operations to see if there's a problem. Well, in 2003, there was another instance of an unarmed black man, another African immigrant, Ousmane Zongo, who was killed in an undercover operation in a warehouse. Mistaken identity, everything that went wrong, that could have gone wrong, went wrong. There was no investigation then, or if there was, Commissioner Kelly has not told the public about it. So I think, as I say, the police department can be, I would say, the notorious liars. Certainly they are disingenuous.
Keith, can journalism report the same facts in a way that either divides the community further? Because I think even if we look back to the Amadou Diallo situation, it's not just police versus community. people were divided along racial lines in their views of that case. I think if I remember the polls correctly, most white New Yorkers thought that the jury was right to acquit the cops, and most black New Yorkers thought the opposite. So the city was left divided. Can journalists approach the facts of a case in a way that either exacerbates division or helps to build understanding and consensus and even common ground?
Well, I think you can exacerbate division if ever you lose sight of what the story is about. The story is about an innocent. Well, I don't know. Innocent is a relative term, and what we know for sure is this man was unarmed. He was shot by police. There's no evidence brought forward that I know of to this point to suggest that he was doing anything. And the story that we hear from his surviving friends that they thought they were being hijacked, carjacked.
They thought the police were the thugs.
Is as viable to me as a story of police saying we thought we were being under assault because the car came at us. You can go astray the minute you buy an argument and stay with it. The racial piece of this is complex. I mean, the police officers. This is not all white officers and black people, and the simplicity of that has gone away in our society in a lot of ways already. So there's a great deal of complexity to the racial piece of this. But you know, one of the things you might want to look into journalistically is whether, in fact, it's possible, as those polls suggested after the Diallo case, that a police officer, regardless of his ethnicity, might be more likely to assume the worst in a situation like this when the person involved is black than when a person involved is white. In fact, if I can just go on 1 second longer. I heard a story on TV today in which the police said that they shot a man in the groin as he was running away after they stopped to interrogate 4 men standing on a corner. And then 3 of the men stayed, the 4th man ran away, and he wound up shot. That's all I know at the moment. That's all the story told me. But the reporter kept using the word suspect. And I wanted to know, suspected of what? So there is a way to begin your assumptions in buying into one side of this, and in this case, buying in clearly to the police version of things that skews everything that follows.
When do you call someone a suspect? When do you call them a victim? We call you 2 guests. Thank you, Leonard, very much. And coming up in a minute, Keith Woods will stay with us as we screen a TV news story that he considers one of the best examples of reporting on race and ethnicity. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Prominent professors.
30 seconds.
Outstanding students. Illustrious alumni. All on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Dwayne Ferguson. Join us this Sunday when we'll bring you the stories about people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. For the past 2 months, we've been screening some examples of the best TV reporting on race and ethnicity. We conclude the series now with excerpts from a series on KRON TV in San Francisco that actually reported on race in their own newsroom. This story, as with all the stories in this series, is included in the book and DVD called The Authentic Voice, the best reporting on race and ethnicity, compiled by the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and the Poynter Institute for Excellence in Journalism. It's published by the Columbia University Press. And I just want to say that we are so grateful to the editors for tackling such a difficult but important subject, doing such a great job producing their book, DVD, and website, and providing such a service to any working journalist and journalism school that wants to look at issues of reporting on race and ethnicity head-on. For this final chapter, Keith Woods from the Poynter Institute is still with us. He's one of the editors of the series and the book. Here's our first excerpt from the KRON TV story about race in their own newsroom. The first speaker refers to a meeting they had to discuss their racial climate.
If you'd asked me before that meeting, do people at Channel 4 get along over racial boundaries, I would have said absolutely, without a doubt. Coming out of that meeting, I had to say, I guess not.
There were no cameras at that first meeting, but here's what happened. In a quiet voice, Rick Villaroman told the group that he felt Channel 4 was a socially segregated workplace based on skin color.
There were definite cliques of people, and not cliques of people who had certain likes and interests, cliques of people who were white, cliques of people who were Hispanic, cliques of people who were black.
Rick Villaroman was the one who expressed what apparently a lot of people were feeling, which was that if you're a minority, a racial minority, you are to some degree isolated here at Channel 4. And I had no idea that was true.
For all of us, it was an eye-opener. It helped you look around the room a little differently.
Anchor reporter Pam Moore and news producer Kevin McCormick are co-chairs of the race committee.
Everybody wants to go to work, do your job, and go home. You know, you want to go in, let's not be hassled, let's get it over with, let's go home. And if you think you're doing a good job, then what's the problem? Don't fix it if it's not broke. But the problem is there are some undercurrents that are going on that are often not on the radar, but are still relevant.
Relevant to journalists because our job is to cover the people, events, and issues of an especially diverse Bay Area. A tricky task, says Rosenheim, because we already have trouble even talking about race.
I think journalists, like everyone else, have to have their feet held to the fire for there to be progress. Have to learn to talk about it comfortably, if possible, in a civil and reasonable way, even if not a comfortable way, for certain.
And for the record, that was Pete Wilson, the California newsman, not Pete Wilson, the California governor. Keith Woods, that was a very courageous thing to do, to report on race in their own newsroom.
It was, and you heard Dan Rosenheim talking about that. His instruction to to Pam Moore and to his group was, "Don't blow up my newsroom." There was a good deal of fear going into that whole project that if they took on the newsroom, that they would create divisions there that wouldn't heal themselves, and so they were very worried about that.
And I'm sure that fear would be there at almost any company that decided to take a public look among its employees at race relations in the company.
As their reporting in that series showed, because they went out, in fact, one of the stories was from a NASA site, and they proved exactly that when you gather people together who otherwise get along quietly.
Keep it on the surface.
Keep it on the surface, discuss the things that you can discuss at work and leave the other things at home. Bringing this into the room can feel incredibly dangerous.
But unlike the NASA situation, they had the extra element of actually then putting their discussions about race in their workplace on the air for all the world to see. Yeah. What did they hope to accomplish by doing that?
Well, that came 2 years into the project. I think it might have been that long. It came well into the project, into the About Race series that they had been doing. And so they had established themselves very well in their community on the subject of race to begin with. But what they heard, and many people said it to them, is if you're going to tackle this subject, if you're going to come to our company or to our organization and report on us and our race relations, tell us who you are. And that's what they did.
And what do you think is important that they discovered about race in their own newsroom and do you think it relates to newsrooms in general around the country?
Well, you heard Greg Lyon talking about what he discovered. I've been here a long time. I thought things were fine. Things are not. They discovered that when you enter into this, it gets pretty murky and it feels pretty dicey. But in the end, as happened with the series and this team of journalists who were part of it, the more you talk about it and the more freely you're able to bring it up in any situation, the better your journalism ultimately, and you feel a hell of a lot better about what you're doing when you tackle those subjects, knowing that you've given it a really good chance of succeeding.
One pattern that was cited in that clip was for people to congregate in racial cliques.
Right.
But the clip made it sound like that had a disparate impact on different groups. Racial minorities felt isolated, the speaker said. But it didn't address the effects on whites who didn't hang out with the non-whites. I wondered about that.
Well, because I think Rick Villaroman's point in that case was that there were relatively few people of color at the station.
So since it wasn't equal numbers, if everybody's just hanging out with their own, then the people in the small group are going to feel isolated.
Right. And depending upon your ethnicity in that newsroom, your group could get really small.
Did their findings about themselves result in any policy changes in the workplace that you know of?
I don't know that it resulted in a policy change specifically. I know that Emerald Ye, who was on this team and did one of the stories that's in the book, had been involved years earlier in creating policy for the organization around issues of diversity. But what did change, and what they experienced for years, maybe months, because that station has been pulled apart since then, is that when they dealt with those issues, and they came up all the time in the community that involved race and ethnicity, they were able to talk about the story in a lot more depth, and the stories, as I said before, were much better because of it.
Now here's more of the KRON TV story about race as included in The Authentic Voice, the best reporting on race and ethnicity. Again, this focuses on their own newsroom.
Live from the news leader in Northern
One of the jobs of the race committee was to study ethnic diversity in our own news.
Looking pale and drawn, Monica Lewinsky left the federal courthouse here in...
It's August 1998. During marathon sessions, they watched 3 days of tapes from daybreak to night beat.
The suspect's father left without comment.
No one is sure exactly how to measure diversity on the news.
Well, say we wait. I mean, I don't know. Discuss it with her later. We'll discuss it with her later.
But with help from the Public Research Institute at San Francisco State University, the committee has devised a kind of scorecard to count the race of people as they appear on the screen, as well as what roles they play in the stories.
Occupation of speakers. You have you have a public official.
Well, it definitely wasn't a quota system. We weren't trying to say these are the numbers that we have to have. But we wanted to try and identify areas where we really weren't reflecting the diversity of the Bay Area.
Central involvement is white.
All the speakers were white.
Speakers are white.
Central involvement whites.
2 African Americans.
So we have a white.
Yeah.
Producer Terry Atkins was on the committee.
In my group, anyway, we felt, wow, a lot of white people on TV. We're putting a lot of white people on TV, very rarely people of color.
But here's what makes diversity such a complicated subject to pin down. The fact is, even in the diverse Bay Area, whites make up a majority of the population. When the scorecards were sent to San Francisco State for independent analysis, the raw numbers showed that whites were actually underrepresented on our news compared to population figures. Blacks were overrepresented. Hispanics were slightly underrepresented, and Asians were substantially underrepresented.
And then when statistics came back, it showed that we were reflecting the diversity of our community fairly well. Not the best, and there could be improvements, but we were reflecting the diversity of our community on a pretty decent basis. And that surprised us.
But the committee still expressed concern that most experts interviewed on the news were white, and a lopsided 21 out of 23 human interest stories were about white people.
Television is perception. If you have 15 stories and most of the experts in those stories are white, it doesn't matter how many people of color you have in the background. The story is dominated by people who are white. And unless you can redress that balance somehow, I don't think you're reflecting the communities you're trying to serve.
So, Keith Woods, what did you think of their study of racial representation in their news stories?
Well, they got a lot of help from San Francisco State and the Maynard Institute in trying to figure out how to count. And that is such a contentious issue in journalism in general, and well, it's in society. It's going on right now in the Supreme Court. But what they did try to do was to account for the way people showed up on television. And that's one of the values of the research model that they were using. So the ultimate value to the station wasn't that they walk away and say, okay, well, tomorrow we must make sure that we have 2 of those and 1 of those, and they got to be speaking in this one and not speaking in that one. It simply raised the awareness that when you looked at the macro product of your news, you wound up with a lot of stories in which these people were represented in crime and sports, and when they were in other stories, they were background. They weren't of any importance in the piece.
Right.
That can change your journalism.
One of the things that came up was that the experts cited were disproportionately white.
Right.
Of course, a lot of journalists would say, well, unfortunately, a lot of the experts out there in many fields are disproportionately white.
Right, but expert is such a relative term. People call me an expert in ethics, but there are 2 other people who work with me who are far more expert than I am in the field of ethics, for example. But I am an expert, and if you took any field and looked for an expert, you could find a pretty vast racial and ethnic range, gender range, geographic range of folks. And the problem with journalism is that we don't look far enough.
You interviewed people from that newsroom. It's on the DVD that comes with your book, The Authentic Voice, your interview of those people off the air. What was interesting about their reaction to their experience after the fact?
Well, Craig Franklin, the producer there, twice cried talking about it because it had changed him so profoundly to have been a part of the project. I guess what I found most interesting was that they attacked this project, the entire project, not just a story about themselves, with the notion that they were simply going to look for as Craig said, the best facts available, not the best story, the best fact. Let's make sure that we can find out what is true. They also said, you know, what we want to try to do is help people to be more candid about the subject of race. And they found some good ways of doing that in their journalism.
Do you think that the results of this story can serve to improve not just race relations in their workplace, but journalism?
Well, I think anything can improve journalism if journalists pay attention to it. So the value of a story like that, and especially listening to those 4 journalists talk about that experience, is that it brings to the fore something that so rarely gets talked about. I mean, they talked about it themselves in their own newsroom. They might have done 1,000 stories on race, but they didn't talk about race much. I was with a group of producers yesterday, and we were talking about the challenge of telling difficult stories, especially when you've got racial conflict, as you do in New York right now with this story. And the thing that they said when they were done, several of them, was, I'm glad I don't have to write and report on this myself. It tells you a lot about the power of this. It is frightening. But if you can just jump in and get comfortable with the discomfort, as Craig Franklin says, things get better.
Start a conversation. This is the last segment of 8 consecutive shows.
Thank you for doing that.
That we've done segments based on your book and DVD, The Authentic Voice. There is a website, I want to say, which is theauthenticvoice.org. It's a great resource for journalists, for journalism students, and for anyone curious about how race and journalism intersect. I want to thank you for doing it and your co-editors and for making your material so available to us. Hopefully we've provided a service with this series. You've certainly provided one with this collection.
Thank you. And on behalf of Arlene Morgan and Alice Pfeiffer, I want to say thank you back.
Okay, Keith Woods, thank you very much. Well, coming up next, using web video to gloat about being a bully and what to do about it. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Sure, my neighbors Gene and Louise, they may be superheroes with superpowers, but that doesn't make them so super at saving energy and money.
Honey?
I may not be able to harness the power of the elements, but I save significant cash and help the environment with appliances, electronics, and windows featuring the Energy Star label. Discover your own energy-saving superpowers with Energy Star. Go to getenergysmart.org.
Mom, Dad's making fondue again.
Once you see the world through math and science, you'll never see anything the same way again. Go to girlsgotech.org.
You'll see.
Does peace really have a chance within our lifetime? At Rotary, we believe it does. We've created programs at universities around the world dedicated solely to teaching peace to a new generation. There's a new symbol for peace. Rotary.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Bullying is hard enough to tackle in the classroom as it is. More than 3/4 of students say they have been bullied at one time, according to the Justice Department. Well, now some school bullies are trying to reach a bigger audience by taping their attacks and posting them online. It's called cyberbullying, and dozens of these videos involve schools in New York City, where some students get their 15 minutes of fame by picking on their peers and putting it on YouTube. Here's one video filmed at Lehman High School in the Bronx that even has its own soundtrack. Now, a warning, this video is violent. Well, joining me now to talk about how the Internet is adding another dimension to bullying in New York and beyond is Juliet Fletcher, a freelance writer who has written extensively on the subject. Welcome to the program.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
Does capturing an instance of bullying like that and putting it on YouTube make it a different kind of bullying?
It's definitely a different kind of bullying. It's one of several kinds of cyberbullying. In fact, it's not the only case. It's not the only kind. What it is a way to magnify the effect, and obviously that's got some appeal for kids who have access to cameras, camera phones. They're able to capture it, show their friends, and then show everyone else. And that's where it gets, that's where the impact really lies, I think.
There's another word for videos like that, though: evidence.
That's a good point. And I have to say, I've been looking at this over the last year, and I would like to see a case where the school follows up on it. I would really like to see a case where a school takes the tape and does what is necessary with that tape.
In other words, you have yet to see a case where the school takes it and follows up on it.
Not that I know of. I do know that schools have started to take it much more seriously, and cases where students have maybe bullied other kids using email, using IM. There have been cases which have definitely resulted in kids being removed from school, suspended, and so on regarding that. But YouTube and other sites like that have really put this out in the public domain away from the schools. And what's important is that it's taken it out of the school domain completely, and schools are sort of wondering what to do about it, I think.
Do you think the videos incite more bullying?
It's tough to say. What I would say is that watching a video like that, for an adult, it's one experience. For kids, it may be another. And even if you don't know anyone involved, you might feel like this is somehow permitted. It's starting to edge into the entertainment realm, and that isn't a comfortable place for it to be, I think, when it's sort of unmediated that way.
Indeed, and that video even seemed heavily produced, tightly edited, with a hip-hop soundtrack laid under the raw sound of the interaction.
Right. What you need to remember is, that kid, he's suffering something, apparently he's of Middle Eastern origin, and you need to watch that video with the soundtrack off, I think, at least once, because I think then you see that the music was just putting a pace on it that made it easier to watch. Without the soundtrack, I think it starts to be much more sinister, and and you should definitely watch it that way.
Well, in fact, we have another instance without a soundtrack, so let's watch another video. This time the two kids involved both seem willing to fight, but one is much smaller than the other and so doesn't stand a chance. Now, this one also takes place in the city, near Brooklyn Tech High School, and I should warn you that there are some very violent scenes here, and you may find it disturbing.
Right, you see, the thing about bullying is often that, I mean, fighting and bullying, the tension between those two terms has been the sort of history of bullying over the last 30 years. It's taken a long time for people to realize that bullying isn't a fight where someone loses. It's systematic, kind of picking on somebody.
Which would you call this?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it looks a lot like a fight that obviously got out of hand. I would be more hesitant to say that was bullying than the first one, actually, because the first one I felt like it was clearly ganging up on the kid, and it was also I don't know, just harder to watch for me, actually.
Right. People post lots of fight videos as well. But in this, I mean, it's like an informed consent question. Can a kid who's much smaller than another kid really give informed consent to fight, or does it become an act of pseudo-bullying?
Well, I mean, I think that it's a complex dynamic, and, you know, really take away the camera, which is, you know, the interesting issue, but take away the camera and you've still got an instance where the school really has failed to monitor what's going on there, has completely you know, has let the kids just run around. Maybe they're outside the school gates. Maybe that's why they think it's out of their purview.
How popular would you say this phenomenon is? We just screened 2 videos. I don't know if that's 2 out of 6 or 2 out of 6 million.
Well, I mean, I know that the first video got at least 1,000 hits, I heard, and that, sadly, the more that you report the issue, sadly, that's going to send people in to go and look.
To see them.
But I know also from looking just today, you can find many videos like this because kids find it. I mean, some kids are just putting it up there because they think their friends will see it, and they forget the larger impact, if you like, that it's going out to the whole nation and further afield, I mean, abroad.
New York City's discipline code, of course, bans bullying. There's some wording, intimidation and bullying behavior. But do you know how that's enforced?
All I know, my research showed, I actually spent some months talking to teachers and students in 5 or 6 different high schools in New York City, and again, cyberbullying came up as an issue, but I was talking about all different kinds of bullying, and I heard that weekly incident reports are circulated in the public schools, looking at instance of, you know, any fights, any kind of verbal altercations, all that kind of stuff, and that's where anything that's going to arise is going to arise out of being noted in an incident report. But if it doesn't happen in the school, the chances of the teachers taking the time to do it, to look into it, are really much lower.
So you don't think the teachers are equipped to follow up on YouTube? Teachers are talking about YouTube. Teachers are talking about MySpace these days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they know they're there. I mean, and the teachers that I spoke to actually were very much aware of it and actually had found some innovative ways to talk about bullying in a broader sense in the classroom, but that isn't the same as having the time to really chase down the exact circumstances of a fight, to really talk to the individual students alone and make sure that they're telling the whole story about what led up to it. Because, you know, incidents, I mean, a kid can be reticent and can be even acting up in class, but as one really very well-informed teacher told me, that can often be an indication that he's bullied, not necessarily the problem child, but he's in fact on the receiving end of this. And one teacher even went as far as to say to me, if a student comes in acting tough, even carrying a weapon in school, it's because he's more likely to feel like he's being about to be attacked. That's the cycle where you end up, you know, and then he might be caught with a weapon in school.
We saw that even in the Columbine shooting.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I mean, Columbine was when this country really woke up to what bullying had become and really realised how the depths that some kids were sinking to. But then it lay low, and the debate, certainly in New York City, I think, tended towards more gun violence, maybe gang violence in schools, and looked to try ways to kind of calm that more volatile situation in perhaps more subtle ways of bullying, more emotional kind of intimidation too.
I'm still kind of amazed at that first video, which was really, the way it appeared, a bias crime in addition to other things, because the kid seemed to be getting picked on because he was of Middle Eastern descent of some kind. But YouTube has a policy, at least it says it does, of banning videos that are built around gratuitous violence or sexually explicit content. Why don't they ban these?
Honestly, I think that I would like to hear them defend themselves on that, actually, because I think that there's no bloodshed in that one. But to me, it's got all the violence, and the verbal violence is particularly strong, and that's maybe why the soundtrack is there, because I think otherwise you just hear the jeering and the name calling, and you know, I think that they count as, I mean, they're very much violent. You know. Could
it be that some of these things get up before you know, the powers that be at YouTube have a chance, and maybe that's when we saw it?
If they're moderated reactively, and they're you know, the only opportunity is to take something down that's already been posted, I think the damage can be done already, because remember, really the damage is being done to that student's social network. He's going to be embarrassed, he's going to feel ashamed and isolated.
And that got 13,000 hits. And as I understand it, people have to complain to YouTube before they take action.
And to do that, you need to go in search of these things and see what's on there. So.
There's, we're just about out of time, but there's another medium dealing with the issue of bullying, and that's video games. There's a game called Bully for PlayStation where a 15-year-old is intimidated at school. That video drew protests from anti-bullying advocates because the game's character uses weapons like baseball bats to fight back, but that's a commercial product. That's even worse.
Well, it's a commercial product. I should say that in one point about that, as I understand it, the protagonist in that game is fighting back against the older bullies in a school. The opponents of your character, if you play the game, are bigger, tougher bullies, and it's whether you can fight past them and apparently help your students. Now, I think that this is a bit of a fine line to be drawn, and the game makers also have acknowledged that. But
is it self-defense
or
is it violence?
Right.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on. And that's it for tonight's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. And don't forget my daily radio show on WNYC, New York Public Radio, weekday mornings at 10. Tomorrow morning, members of the Iraq Study Group, including former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and former Clinton Chief of Staff Leon Panetta. That's at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Have a great night.